Now, Newbigin was a very profound interpreter of the gospel, and I think that his interpretive principle, congregation as hermeneutic, that's the word, interpretive, hermeneutic, the congregation as hermeneutic of the gospel is one of the most profound insights that the church has come up with about the nature of the church. Let's begin with one of his quotations from that chapter. He says that if the community which is formed by Jesus becomes the place where men and women and children find that the gospel gives them the framework of understanding, then they have the lenses through which they're able to understand and cope with the world. Now, most of us are not used to thinking so much of the gospel as being lenses through which we are enabled to understand the world, but rather the gospel is something which is an abstract in some respects. It's not something that is so concrete as to actually give you a new view. And I think we have to get our heads around that. We have to start to say, yes, the gospel is transformative. The gospel does give us a new view. And the new view is created by the congregation to which we belong. The congregation, if it's to be true to its calling of the gospel, has 6 particular challenges. It has to be a community of praise. Now, the community of praise, we understand well. It can be about singing hymns of praise, it can be about praying prayers of praise, etc. But I think the undergirding nature of praise is that it is joyful. The community of praise is joyful. Even the trees clap their hands for joy when they're expressing praise to God. It's a fundamental tenet. It's a fundamental of life itself that we give thanks for all that we have, for all that we are. And Jesus said of himself that he came in order that we might have life in all its abundance. Now, if you've been given that kind of gift, then the tribute of praise comes naturally. That doesn't mean that every congregation has to sing the praises of God in exactly the same way. Different people, different congregations will go about their task differently. There is so much diversity in the church, and the thing that gives it unity is that it's hymns of praise, it's songs of praise, it's prayers of praise is directed towards the other, the divine, the God who is creator. Now, the next thing that community must be is a community of truth. Truth is something that does not come easily to the community of praise. And in fact, I would want to say that in the 20th, 21st centuries, truth is a bit of a victim in most churches. There's an artificial divide set up by congregations. They set a divide up between their particular truth and the more general truths of humanity. And actually, Jesus came to show us the general truths of humanity. And they may be truths of science, and some of the scientific truths actually contradict totally the so-called biblical truths. And we have again to get our heads around the fact that the untruthful community is not a community of praise. So all the knowledge, all the wit, all the wisdom of the world actually counts for something. It counts for something in church. And in order to praise aright, we have to embrace in the widest possible way human truths. Now, the gospel, the congregation as an interpretation of the gospel, does not live for itself, said Newbigin, but is deeply involved in the concerns of its neighbourhood. So to put it bluntly, when you get congregations that rail against such things as homosexuals or gays or lesbians or all the so-called moral ills, you're not deeply involved with your community. When a church fails to address the terrible crimes committed against children, and in New Zealand, our churches have a sad and sorry record of not speaking out against the abuse and violence committed against the young. We have not been counted. We have not been truthful. We have been delusions of our theological mistakes. We have not been committed to our neighbours. We haven't stood up and been counted. And we have to do this. So, there are these truths that involve us deeply in the concern of our neighbourhood. The congregation is also a community where you and I are prepared for and sustained in the exercise of priesthood in the world. And what do we mean by priesthood? We mean the doing of ministry for service of the world, to serve gladly. And the way in which we serve most gladly is to use our education, to use our infrastructure to enable good to come out of human evil, to use our God-given talents that allow genuine priesthood for the community. Some of you are going to train to be ordained presbyters. Some of you are going to train to be ordained deacons. Others of you will simply be lay ministers. But all of us are a royal priesthood that exists for the world which God loves. And God does not condemn the world that he loves. We are also called to be a community of mutual responsibility. Now, Newbigin hit upon a fundamental truth here. We are responsible and we are accountable to one another. This is what Methodist ministry is about. There is no such thing as a solitary Christian. Whether we are lay or ordained is irrelevant. There is no such thing as a solitary Christian. We are in a community of mutual responsibility. And if it's the local community in Epsom or the local community in East Coast Bays or the local community in Seatutai, it doesn't really matter. We are responsible and we are accountable to one another. And finally, and perhaps the most profound of all, we are called to be a community of hope. Many of us have come from a position of hopelessness to be in this community. We are a community of the hope of resurrection. We are a community of the hope of the world. We are a community. Our local congregation is a community which is interpretation of the good news, not the bad news, not the judgmental news, not the news that would put others down, but rather the news that builds them up in the great body of the thing called the church. And the church is nothing but all these hermeneutical interpretations of the gospel. The church is all of these put together in all its myriad of forms. And I think it is a profound insight that Newbigin had. The congregation, each and every congregation that lives out these 6 characteristics, is gospel interpretation. The congregation that doesn't live out these 6 characteristics is not.